Welcome back to the Game Plan Coaching Podcast, and this week's episode is Dr. Anna Stodter. Anna sits right at the heart of the intersection of coaching and research. A brilliant guest for this podcast, exactly what it was made for, really. Anna brings academic ideas and makes them feel genuinely useful and accessible for coaches at lots of levels. Anna is a senior lecturer in sports coaching at Leeds Beckett University. She's a rugby coach, a researcher, and a very creative thinker about how coaches actually learn. Her work bridges this gap between research and the training pitch, and she does it with some brilliant analogies. One of the big things that stood out for me in this conversation and first drew me to Anna's work was the coffee filter analogy. It's really clear, it's very coach friendly, helping us understand how coaches take on some new ideas and reject others, and why context in coaching matters so much. There's definitely no copy and pasting coaching, and that really comes to life through the coffee filter analogy. So if you're ever thinking about why something might have worked brilliantly for another coach and it didn't work in your practice, then that's worth listening to. We talked about coaching being a swampy lowland, some great language there. By uncertainty, experimentation, and obstacles. They're just the job. Anna talked about the learning snack, small intentional moments of trying something new to accelerate your development. And we've heard it before on the podcast, filming yourself coach could feel a bit confronting, but it's really powerful and it helps you develop. So here we go, packed with gold dust. Anna Stodter on the Game Plan Coaching Podcast. Anna Stodter, brilliant to have you on the podcast. I've been dying to have a conversation with you about coaching and coach learning. So before we get into things, would you tell us a little bit about yourself, your coaching and your work?
Yes. Hi, it's a pleasure to be here and to chat to you again, Tom. My role is I'm a senior lecturer in sport coaching at Leeds Beckett University. Alongside that, I coach rugby union at Leeds Beckett University as well with their women's team. And yeah, my day-to-day is teaching coaches, so coaching the coaches on our degree programs at Beckett, but also do research into coach learning. And more recently, that's merged with some stuff to do with coaching for safety in rugby, looking at some of that work with instrumental mouth guards that people might have seen on TV if you watch rugby, and looking at how coaches might be able to coach the tackle and coach contact in a little bit more of a more safe manner, I guess. So yeah, I've moved from coach learning and trying to bring some of that safer participation in rugby background to how coaches can learn to help with that.
Fantastic. What a great range of different pieces of work you're involved in. In terms of your coaching and with your rugby team, what's big in your coaching world at the moment?
Actually, I've been working on a thing that's called Contact Confident. It's part of World Rugby's resources, but that came about through a bit of a coaching experiment with a colleague of mine called Dr. Katrina McDonald. She's a judo coach. And way back in the pandemic, if you remember, back in those days when we couldn't do things like play contact sports, all you could do was go for a little walk around our local area and not speak to anyone, or maybe speak to 6 people only outdoors. So we weren't able to play rugby, and we came back into being able to do sport, and obviously no one had done any contact sport for a while. And my colleague Kat, she's an expert in that landing and falling type stuff that the first thing they do with judo and other martial arts. And so we had a little experiment to see that can we get people ready to play contact rugby safely in a 10-week period by building in some of those principles from falling and landing into rugby. And so again, with that instrumented mouthguard research that I kind of mentioned earlier, it snowballed into a big thing that ended up in us coming up with a few examples of what we'd tried out, and seems to go down quite well with the team of rugby players I was coaching at the time. We've worked with a social media influencer called the Rugby Trainer, who some people might have come across before, Ben John. He's great. We recreated a few different videos, ideas that coaches can take to give them inspiration for coaching contact in rugby, and hopefully helping players be more confident and safer with that. So yeah, that's out. Freely available on Leeds Beckett website at the moment, actually. We created a bit of a curriculum that coaches can adapt for their contexts, and is short 1-minute videos. And so doing that with the players that I coach, and some local schools and clubs have been interested in giving it a go as well. So that's what we're kind of working on at the moment.
Brilliant. That's a really interesting and valuable project. When you've started implementing it with the team that you coach, is there anything that you've noticed or anything you found yourself having to do differently?
Good question. I think I've tried to use this idea of just chipping away at it and having a few minutes, maybe 5-10 minutes as part of a warm-up in as many sessions as possible, just to make it become more of a habit of like, we always do this stuff. I think in the past, sometimes with my coaching, and we've seen this in some other coaching that we've observed through research, that you might forget to do contact almost, or you might just put it off, and then it becomes a bit of a thing where people are like, right, today we're going to do contact, everyone get their mouth guards out, and everyone gets a bit scared almost of, oh no, here you might sort of dread it because you don't often do it, but it's a key part of the game. And especially in women's rugby, where people might be newer to the sport, they might not have been brought up doing rough and tumble and being used to being close to the ground, falling, landing, being in contact with other people. If you can just make it a bit more of a habit to just keep chipping away at little bits of it, then hopefully that'll mean people are a bit more confident with it. And I wouldn't say that I've got it right either. Even just this week, the team that I coach, the feedback that has come from our previous game was that people had maybe lost a bit of that confidence with their contact because we've just had a bit of a break. We haven't played many matches. Obviously, the weather at the moment, at the time of recording, it's February. It's cold, dark, wet. I'm up in the north in Leeds, so there's been a lot of games postponed from weather and teams' availabilities varying and stuff. So we haven't had so many chances to do that work in training, and that aligns with some other research that I've got a colleague called Liz Williams at Swansea University, and they followed a men's and women's rugby team across the course of a season, and they found that although both teams were meant to be doing the same training program, with the women they ended up doing a bit less contact just because of who turned up to the training sessions. You don't have the right people there, or you don't have the equipment that you thought you were going to have, and so it falls by the wayside doing that contact training. And I can definitely see how that happens in my own practice through environmental constraints or just stuff that goes on in the course of a season. So I've kind of gone on a bit of a tangent with that, but I think just like trying to keep chipping away at it.
It sounds like habit and frequency as things that really support like the confidence building around it, not leaving it too long where it becomes forgotten or a big barrier to kind of try and navigate if you're only approaching it inconsistently, or there's big gaps in time. And it sounds like it could be circumstantial as well on why you wouldn't do it, like you just said, whether people not turning up. So it's important to be able to design for contact.
Yeah, and again, through research with coaches, I've been doing a bit of research in Canada, actually, luckily for me. So that we've been working with coaches in Canada who are coaching youth girls or adolescent girls rugby, where the girls are pretty new to rugby. It's not necessarily a well-established sport in Canada for people to know much about or do loads of growing up. And so they're going from never having played, never having seen rugby to full contact rugby in a really short space of time, leading to quite a lot of injuries. So we're trying to work with coaches to help them be able to prepare players a little bit better for that. And sometimes the perception from coaches is that, well, to train for contact, you're just going to go full smash. Like, we just do some tackling, one-on-one, who's going to make the best tackle. And that's pretty intimidating and not really that helpful for actually learning it, unless you naturally happen to be really good at it, tackling. Sometimes the perception is, or the assumption is that that's just what you do to get better at it. I think sometimes people can do with a bit of help or a bit of reminding that you can break it down. You can do bits of the tackle or bits of the landing, the falling and landing, that it's not going to be quite so physically demanding or psychologically daunting to practice in training. So you can still do those things. And yeah, it's sort of cumulative in a good way for people's learning, I hope. So yeah.
Scaling, I guess, is the word that comes to mind. Like being, it sounds kind of, it's all or nothing from never play to full contact. That I can understand why that would feel quite scary or intimidating for anyone, especially if you've never played the game before. But being able to adapt so it still looks like looks like contact, but perhaps isn't absolutely everything involved all in one go. Yeah,
and there's also kind of time limits on how long you're meant to spend doing full contact as well. World Rugby have a guideline of 15 minutes per session of full contact, but well, we don't really know how that would look for, an adolescent female rugby player in Canada who's never played before versus a full-time male elite athlete in England who's played all his life, for example. So yeah, that's where research could be useful. But we don't have that knowledge yet, really. But I suppose that's where the coach comes in. Is at the moment left to the coach to judge what's best for their players and their context. So I'm just trying to help coaches with that a little bit, because that's a hard thing to do. So
it sounds like your research is equipping them with some more tools or moves to be able to make more informed decisions about how to incorporate contact.
Well, I hope so. And I would hate to be accused of saying like, this is what you must do, or this is the right way to do it, because as your listeners probably all know, there's no one right way to do anything in coaching, but it's a set of ideas that are based on evidence from high performance women coaches all around the world. So we did a survey with a group of coaches who are on World Rugby's high performance female coach development programs, and found out about how they tend to coach the tackle. So we brought in some of that evidence from those coaches, evidence from practice with judo principles, and trying that out with case study teams. And we had a working group of other coaches, educators, policymakers from around the world as well. And we came up with some of these ideas. And then, I've taken some of those, got feedback from coaches in Canada, but also the UK. And the coaches were asking for more short, sharp, engaging, fun type activities that, say, if you've had a busy week and you're the coach and you're just rocking up at training thinking, I know that I want to chip away at some contact training. I don't want to do full smash. I want to help the players get a bit more confident, but I just haven't had time to plan this. You could probably check out, that 1 minute video, it's got 3 different things to do with landing and falling, mobility and coordination, and then tackle technique. And we can do that within 10 minutes of a session. Hopefully that's helpful. And then the challenge becomes more about how do you adapt that for your context and to keep it interesting, but engaging and safe.
There's no copy and paste. And I think I was just thinking as you were talking there about the relationship that coaches have with research. There's lots of coaches who probably don't have the time or the opportunity to engage in research in the way that perhaps you do with your work. And it sounds as if this project is bridging the gap in a really coach-friendly way to be able to just make it easy to try stuff out in a really applied fashion that's evidence-informed.
Yeah, I hope so. And that's always been something that I've tried to do with my research. I've always been involved in coaching, and I think most researchers are. I think it's a bit of a artificial divide that sometimes people say, you're an academic, you're just a practitioner. They're separate things. I think most people who are involved in research and academia and coaching, I know, are coaches as well, or have been, or coach developers, for example. But yeah, I've always tried to make sure that whatever I'm doing research-wise is also, is put across and communicated with and done with coaches. So people might have come across the coffee filter metaphor for coach learning, and that was a really fun exercise in translating something that was an academic theory that was grounded in data, but it was made for an academic paper. So it was never really meant for coaches to be able to look at and take and use, but it was reimagined using coffee as a bit of a metaphor and the coffee filter. So that seems to have gone down pretty well with people, and
I have to say, Anna, that research, I mean, I think reading that research was when I first heard of you and your work and some of Chris Cushion's work too. And I think it's so important, from a coach being able to reflect on, well, why do I coach the way that I do? But also for people who are responsible for supporting coaches or designing the systems where coaches engage in learning, understanding what those influences are. And this coffee filter analogy is so important. I ran a workshop last week for some coaches in Oxford, some grassroots football coaches, and I put the three headlines up on the screen around like what influences the way that you learn. So don't copy and paste this, think about this and reflect and etc. So for people who haven't heard of your coffee filter analogy, could you bring it to life for us?
Oh, I'll try. It's been a while, but if people want to look at the coffee filter diagram, it's in the UK Coaching Applied Research Journal. I believe it's volume 8.
Okay.
But it's basically it's a kind of process, or in other words, it's called a grounded theory. So it's a theory of how coaches went about filtering out different things that they came across in their learning experiences. So you use this metaphor of that filter being like a coffee filter to help get the idea across. So the idea being that your biography, so the sum of your knowledge, experiences, values, beliefs, and practices acts like a filter to filter out different ideas or things that you come across. So just like if you are to put coffee through the filter, there'll be some stuff that maybe you don't want. There'll be some stuff that doesn't make it through that filter. And the equivalent to that would be something that you really disagree with, or maybe you've tried it before and didn't work for you, so that's not for you. So that's filtered out. Rejected. Equally, there might be stuff that you come across, say in a coaching course, that you already know about. That's something that you really do all the time, and you're like, yeah, that's fine, but I'm getting kind of reassurance or confidence that this is a good thing to do, so I'll probably do it more. And so that thing's just going straight through that filter, like the stuff that goes through the filter. But say if there's too much of that, then your coffee cup, it might overflow, so it might get a little bit overwhelming. And then you've just got too many things that you're like, oh, do this, do that, do this. Almost like a butterfly coaching people might have heard of, like a butterfly learning, just take on all this stuff and it's too much. There's no kind of unifying taste, to return to the coffee metaphor. But then in between those two things, there's stuff that might make it through your filter. And that would be stuff that maybe fits in with your biography, something that you maybe haven't come across before, but you're thinking, oh yeah, that could be of interest to me, that could be relevant to me. I'll maybe give that a go, try that out. And so same as if you've just put some coffee through your filter, it's made it through, you need to try it out. You need to taste it to see if it works for you. But in the research, this was with football coaches over a period of a year or so, we found that before trying it out, these coaches, any new ideas that they want to try out had to be adapted for the context. So it might be that you're coaching a younger age group than where this idea came from. You might have seen a coach doing something with an older age group and you think, oh, that seems quite interesting to me. Might try that out, but I would need to adapt it for the age group that I coach. And same with your coffee. You might need a little bit of sugar to sweeten it up if you've had a long day and it's you need a bit of a pep, or you might need to take the edge off with a little bit of milk. Maybe not if you're a coffee connoisseur. I think that's probably sacrilege. But anyway.
Faux pas.
Yeah. Before trying it, you need to maybe adapt it for your context. And then the coach's the next step. It was a reflective conversation. And that's more than just a discussion. That's actually a theoretical term that originally came from Schoen and Gilbert and Trudell, who looked at model youth sport coaches back in 2001. But it's the same process that I found in these coaches, soccer coaches, football coaches in the UK, where they were experimenting with ideas, trying it out, tweaking it, maybe just rejecting it if it didn't quite work, just ditching that, or adapting it again and trying again. So that cycle of experimentation, adapting, adopting is known as a reflective conversation. Same again with the coffee. You might try it out and you might think that's a bit hot. I'll just leave it, wait a bit, and then try again in a few minutes. So it's experimenting, adapting, adopting, till eventually you've got the perfect thing that works for you, and then that in turn influences the biography of the coach. to use the coffee, you're revitalized, refreshed for the next thing that you come across. And yeah, same with learning. It's a constant individualized blend based on who you are, what you're trying out, and the context that you're trying that out in. So hopefully that's
so clear.
Good.
I want to clip the last 4 minutes, and then I'm just going to play that before any workshop I do in the future to help people understand. And you'll see it at the end of this podcast. I'll ask you for your game-changing advice. And I always say to the coaches listening, this is something you might apply or edit or just reflect on. So you've definitely influenced part of the shape of this podcast. So biography, you'll see things that you agree or disagree with. The biography filter, the contextual filter, trying to make things fit and work for the environment where you're working, and that reflective practice, which is tweaking, experimenting, trying things out, adapting, so then you can find the perfect blend for you. I've heard you use the word experimentation a few times in our conversation already today. Is that important to you, like the way that you coach?
Yeah, it is. I think you do need to have the time and space, so the mental energy almost, to be able to experiment with stuff. Again, that comes originally from Donald Schoen was a researcher that actually looked into the professional learning of, I think it was architects and town planners, where this came from. As I said, Gilbert and Trudell, and then myself and Chris Cushion, we found this similar process of experimentation happening in coaches. Schoen kind of said that the more kind of established professions, they're learning and doing their practice on hard, high ground, almost like the cliff at the top, where the things that you come across are a bit more predictable. Perhaps if you're an architect or a civil engineer, you might be building a bridge, and so there might be particular materials that you use, and you know the properties of the materials. They're not necessarily going to change loads. You've laws of physics, etc., that you can rely on. Whereas in coaching, it's more of a swampy lowland that's down at the bottom. There's forever shifting things. You don't really know what's under your feet. Hopefully not a crocodile or something nasty that's coming up to bite you. But it's a bit more dynamic. You can't always rely on the competing kind of goals of the different people that are involved. People are working to different agendas, etc. So that means that experimentation becomes a bit more important. In order to sort of grow and become more effective as a coach, you need to be able to navigate those swampy lowlands using things like experimentation, like try stuff out. Because if you just do the same thing all the time, it might not work every time, because the stuff around you, the environment around you, is always changing and dynamic and unpredictable. So yes, that's the theoretical background to it. But yeah, it is important to me. It's just sometimes with all coaches are busy, I think. I don't think I've ever met a coach who's not busy, and you get out what you put in, don't you? So there's times where you're just going from session to session, like, oh goodness, I think I've got a plan. I think it's written down. And so there's not really the mental energy or time or space to experiment or try different new things out, and you just go back to what you know works. So yeah, it is important. But again, that's where people like coach developers or people within the coaching team or critical friends can be helpful to hold you to account, or at least just have conversations to help you talk about the things that you tried out in a session, or encourage you to try something new and help you work out that work. How do I know? Could I adapt it? Could I try something else? Help you come up with strategies to experiment with.
Yeah, and the realities of coaching is that it's pretty tough at times. And like you said, it's not always possible to go and try and experiment with new stuff all the time. There's something in that for me to say to coaches, well, there might be moments within your practice, within the week or the month, which lend itself really well to just trying something new, even if it's just for 10 minutes, just to have a go and see what you learn, and then see if that impacts your future practice, because you'll never know what you find out by experimenting and doing different things. And that experiment could be anything. Yeah, I guess it doesn't have to be totally disruptive that you change your entire training program or your entire coaching practice for that night. It could be in a small dose to just see what happens.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the idea with the contact confidence stuff I was talking about earlier. I would hate for it to be thought of as, you must do this. It's meant to be a set of ideas that hopefully people would be able to just take a little bit of and try out. I presented some of the work again in Canada, and somebody who was watching that is called Dr. Stephen West. He's a researcher over there. He does lots of injury prevention, injury surveillance kind of work. But he said it reminded him what the coaches were asking for in terms of short, sharp reminders of stuff that they could be doing. He said it reminded him of the exercise snacking thing, like work, where in order to get people more physically active, it's this idea of taking a little exercise snack, like a few minutes, like get up and move around a little bit, avoid being too sedentary. So could you think of coach learning in that way as a little bit of maybe a learning snack? What are you going to try in this coaching session that you've got tonight that's maybe even just, I don't know, it might even just be talking about something using some different words, so that wouldn't take any time more than what you'd normally do. Or we talked about filming your coaching, maybe something you could try. It wouldn't take any extra time to do it. Maybe some extra time to download whatever you've filmed and review it. Yeah, what could you do that might just mix things up a bit and make it more interesting for you, but you might learn something?
Yeah, love that. Learning snack. I'm definitely stealing that, Anna, and using that at some point very, very soon. But I get it, right? It doesn't have to be a big chunk of stuff that you do. It could just be for 5 minutes, short and sweet. Try this out and then see where it takes you.
Maybe it's a little like a little biscuit to go with your coffee.
What? You're leaning into the analogy now. Yeah.
I do love analogies and metaphors. Watch this space for more ideas coming soon.
Okay, wonderful. Love that. Right, Anna, let's get into the game plan. So in every episode of the podcast, we invite the guests to contribute something to our ever-growing game plan. It could be a story, an idea, some research, something you've done recently that you'd like to share, but something really that we'd like coaches to reflect on and hopefully learn something from, or take something away from it. So what would you like to add to our coaching game plan?
Well, I think it follows on nicely from what we've just been talking about. So maybe something that can help you to learn. What are you going to experiment with? What are you going to try out in your coaching? And we mentioned earlier filming yourself coaching, and we know that that's a really powerful way for coaches to learn, just from research that's been done in the past. Lots of studies have kind of done that, but even in my own work, I filmed coaches as a way of collecting data on their practice, because I wanted to use systematic observation to count up their behaviours, look at whether they changed over time. But in the end, it turned out to be a bit of an intervention where coaches actually learn from that process of being interviewed using those video clips, and they weren't actually meant to learn, but they just did. Like, it was almost by mistake, because it's quite a powerful method of reflecting and basically having that reflective conversation where they were trying stuff out and sitting down with myself just to chat through what they were doing in their coaching. They ended up learning almost accidentally. Filming yourself coaching is very powerful, and I'm just introducing the first year students at Leeds Beckett that I teach at the moment to that. I think next week we're going to be miking them up and filming their coaching sessions, so they're all excited and nervous and dreading that a little bit, because it's quite emotionally demanding and quite confronting. As one coach said to me in my research, there's nowhere to hide, and it can be embarrassing as well, watching yourself back, listening to your own voice, which never sounds like it sounds in your head. But it is very powerful. And yeah, I would say that during my coaching qualifications, part of it, I was filmed by my mentor, and watching that back was, it was useful. I remember one example where I was doing a demonstration with some players and talking through what I wanted them to do, and that maybe took a couple of minutes. It wasn't too bad. Like, quite often, one really easy thing to do is just to time how much time you spend speaking, or how much time the participants in your session actually spend doing the thing that you want them to get better at. Some of the research has shown that can be almost a third of the session is spent with the coach, either speaking or like transitioning from thing to thing. So you've got a third of the session is not the players doing something. So that's quite, it's quite powerful. But yeah, the example where I was doing that demonstration and talking through something, the person that was taking part in that demonstration was on the floor, because in rugby you do get on the floor, but she's getting cold. She's in the grass on the floor. She probably can't hear what I'm saying very well, but she definitely can't see what I'm saying. And she can't see it from the perspective of how I'm trying to get that across. And that's something that I just didn't realise when I was doing it. But watching it on a video, you're seeing it from a different perspective, chatting it through with another person. It's really obvious that that person's been lying on the ground for 2 minutes and they're not getting anything from that situation. So yeah, there's stuff like that can be really apparent. But also I used it to count up the number of questions that I used in my coaching and the type of questions that I used, so you can create your own observation framework. I was quite interested in questioning because, again, in the research, a lot of the research has found that coaches tend to use more closed questions or divergent questions. So what that means is diverging onto typically a correct answer, but it could be there's a set number of answers that you can give. A yes, no. There's convergent questioning where you're a bit more exploratory and there's lots of different potential answers. It's suggested that can help the participants think a little bit more, be a little bit more analytical, because they have to think. They're not just regurgitating or recalling something. So I was quite interested in what types of questions did I ask. So I did that before I went on a course, and again a year after. I already at the start of the course had quite a big proportion of convergent questions, and then at the end it was even bigger. And then I wasn't sure, like once I did that, I was kind of like, oh no, what have I just reinforced what I've already thought? Have I really filtered out some stuff that could have really changed the way that I coach, or is this a good thing? I don't know. So, yeah, it was quite an interesting experiment, to use that word again.
Yeah. And like from the way you've explained it, this isn't necessarily about a coach watching back their practice and saying that was good and that was bad. It's about being really thoughtful about what you see, and maybe with some focus or intention about something you want to zoom in on or get better at. I'm thinking about coaches who haven't done this before, and going back to what you said, that it could feel a bit confronting and there's nowhere to hide. If you were picking up a conversation with a coach who's just filmed themselves and you want to kind of look at the video together, where would you begin? Like, what types of questions might you ask, or provocations would you put in front of the coach so it doesn't feel like it's a confrontation, but it feels like it's a real learning opportunity?
That's a good question. Again, I'll go back to the research. I was just interested in what things they noticed or what stood out to them. And that was quite tricky, actually, because the way that the method works is you're meant to ask the coach at the end of the session, which bit stood out to you? What do you think you would like to talk about when we review the video? And quite often coaches would say, oh, I don't really know, you tell me. But you're wanting them to take ownership of that, which is quite tricky when they're helping you out for a research project. And there's sort of power dynamics going on there, as much as you would hate for that to be the case. You're seen as the researcher and you're there recording it for your research. So you want the coach to be able to lead that, but I can appreciate that they are where they are and they are who they are, so it's what they're ready for. So in order to answer that question, it's quite tricky, but it depends on the coach.
Yeah, of course. And I can relate to the response from the coach being, well, can you just tell me what you've noticed? Because when there's so many things to take in, you maybe don't know where to start. The best assessment I was ever involved in, I was finishing off a course with the FA, and Ben Bartlett, who was the assessor, said to me beforehand, look, you finished the course, it's fine, you've passed. So let's use the assessment as a learning opportunity. What do you want me to watch? So I was mindful of talking for too long and not using a variety of different coaching interventions. So I asked him to gather some feedback on the interventions I used. So when I finished this session, which he filmed, he just presented me with a list of different ways of drive-by coaching, guided discovery, command, etc. And said, well, what do you think of this? What do you make of it? And we just got into a dialogue about it. And I just remember it so vividly, because he wasn't telling me, you've done this right and you've done that wrong. You've ticked this box, but you haven't ticked that one. It was a genuine conversation about the stuff that had happened, and it was two different perspectives looking at it together. And for me, that completely transformed my appreciation of A, having another person with you while you're coaching, but B, the opportunity to raise your awareness, talk about things, notice things without the fear of it being, quote, right or wrong.
Yeah. Because back to your original question, if it was somebody new that wasn't that experienced with the method, or I didn't really know them that well, then I'd probably just get the video on and sit there and watch it together and just chat through it, to be honest. Sometimes that's even quite funny when you see the stuff that the people you're coaching get up to in a session that maybe you hadn't noticed beforehand, or you notice sometimes people messing around or doing a little skill just offhand that you hadn't asked them to do or you hadn't really noticed at the time. So there's little moments that can be quite fun to notice and just go from there, really.
Yeah, nice. Brilliant, Anna, thank you. So you've added filming yourself coach into the game plan, and then just added some context around that about having intention. You highlighted that a different perspective or using questions so you develop your own observation framework could be really helpful, and then having someone else to talk it through with. Mm-hmm. So thank you. Brilliant addition. I know that lots of people who listen to this podcast love the tangible takeaway that they can go and think about afterwards, because coaches love pinching each other's ideas. And I always frame this, like I said earlier in the conversation, and credit to you for influencing me around this, that coaches might want to go and apply what you share with us. It might just fit and work because it resonates with them. They might want to edit it to suit the context where they're coaching, or it might just be an idea that they hold on to and reflect on for a while and maybe come back to later. So Anna, what's your game-changing advice for our listeners?
I think it will use that experimentation idea. Just come up with something that you'd love to try out and give it a go. And it could be something really small, it could be a little snack, or it could be completely transforming your whole diet. It could be the whole curriculum level intervention, or it could just be, a 30-second thing that you want to try out in your coaching. Just to try it out. Think about if it works, and think about how you would know if it's worked or not, and then think about how you might adapt that or adopt it, or just reject it and try something else.
For people listening to this, watching the video, I don't know where to start. I'd love to do that, but I don't know where to start. Is there anything you would guide coaches' attention towards as a starting point to have a go at, or think about what could have an impact in their coaching environment?
Well, I think one thing we haven't talked about much today yet is the participants in the session. So maybe work with your participants to identify something that they would like to do, or they would like you to do. It could even just be a way of engaging them at the start of a session, a way of rating what they've learned, or a way of gauging the vibe. It could be a thumbs up, thumbs down, or thumbs in the middle vibe at the start, or a way of rating how confident they are at the thing that you want to get better at, and then measure it again at the end and see if there's more thumbs up by the end. Something like that. Yeah. I say start with the athletes, start with the participants.
Nice place to begin. And we haven't spoken much about athlete voice and how do we co-create and bring them with us. And does that show up in your coaching, working with the athletes? I was out in a conversation the other day with a chap called Keith Sharp from British Cycling.
Yes.
And Keith said to me, if you went to a nightclub, and it wasn't feedback for me, but he said, if you went to a nightclub and you started dancing at someone, then you're probably not going to strike up much rapport. But if you dance with people, then you never know kind of how the evening might go. Coaching, he said, was very similar. So you don't coach at people, you coach with people. And it's a partnership. So in terms of working with the players rather than coaching at the players, how does that show up in your practice?
Good question. It's something that I haven't got nailed on. As we talked about before, coaching's so dynamic that you've got, especially with a team sport like rugby, there's just so many different individuals. They all have their own biographies, but also their own agendas. I wouldn't say I've nailed it, but one thing that I have been experimenting with this season is using our values as a way to structure the curriculum. So our values stand for BRATS. And so B is for brave, for example. So we might do a block of 3 weeks of working on brave as a value, and we would try and involve the athletes in that by asking them, for example, if this session's about defence and contact in rugby, what would being brave in that situation look like to you or feel like to you? And then get some thoughts from them before the session starts on what that would look like. And then you can use that at the end of the session as to in what ways have we shown ourselves to be brave in this session. And then you could maybe go more individually. Somebody give me an example of something that they're proud of that they've been brave with this session. And that could be making a tackle where someone was much bigger than me and I felt like I doubted my ability to do it, but I did it. Or it could just be turning up for the session because I've had a terrible day and the bus didn't show up, or I had to ask somebody that I don't really know very well for a lift, or, that sort of stuff. So yeah, that's something that I've been experimenting with. And that is one way that you could involve the participants, through team values or through setting out what success might look like.
Well, love that idea. And I think for any coach listening, if they're working in an organisation or a club where there's some values that are an umbrella around all the work that goes on, that could be a brilliant thing to draw on, or maybe create your own with the group that you're coaching. Awesome. So Anna, I'm torn between for the title of this podcast. It's either coaching is a swampy lowland or something about experimentation. So I have to think about that. Some of the headlines that have stood out for me just in our conversation today is like, because coaching is dynamic and ever changing, there's a need there to experiment and try out new things to try and effectively create the best environment possible for the participants. Gives you energy as well as a coach. You started off today by talking about some of the cross-sport falling principles that you've brought across from judo into the rugby, and I think it's a really interesting point there for coaches to think about what can we learn from other sports and other environments and the way they go about teaching things and the environment they create. We spoke about coach learning and the contextual filter, the biography filter, the reflective filter, and how that impacts on what coaches go and apply or tweak or keep or maybe reject. And then we've just finished there talking a bit about values and value structuring a curriculum. That's a really interesting piece. And then the big takeaway for me is that learning snack. How can we create little moments to go and do something that helps accelerate our learning in our coaching?
Yeah, I know that snacks and takeaways aren't the best for our health though, so we do need a good balanced diet.
Okay. I think next time we chat, we've got to go full analogy throughout the whole conversation. I think that you'd be in your sweet spot then. Look, thanks so much for being a guest on the podcast. It's been brilliant to spend the last 45 minutes with you.
Pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Game Plan Coaching Podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please follow the show and share it with a coach who might find it useful. I'd love to hear your feedback and any ideas you have for future guests. You can get in touch through the links in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and go well in your next coaching session.